Welcome. It is my honor to introduce our next speaker. We have her slide already on the screen, but Marsha is co-founder and co-coordinator of the CATESOL Teaching of Pronunciation Interest Group, known as TOP. She also volunteers as web manager, professional development coordinator, event registrar, conference organizer, and she works with me on the CATESOL YouTube channel. She is a professor emerita at Mission College and has served the U.S. Department of State as an English language specialist. She has authored books and digital materials for English language learners and is followed around the world as Pronunciation Doctor on YouTube. Please welcome Marsha J.
Yay. Hello, good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Our session here is on visualizing speech to enable greater intelligibility. So my first question for all of you is this. If you could put in the chat panel, do you teach speech or pronunciation? So I know that, in teaching English as an additional language, we focus on different aspects of the language, and some of us teach speech or pronunciation or both, oral communication, something like that, and others perhaps specialize in different areas. So a question about our audience here, how are we situated in terms of teaching speech and pronunciation? Okay, so we got some people who say yes, 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 sometimes, and thumbs up, I suppose that means a yes as well. Now let's go on to the next question, which is, do you use spectrograms in your teaching speech and pronunciation? Yes. 1, yes, frequently I use them. 2, a few times I've tried it. 3, I've heard of them but never tried. And 4, what's a spectrogram? Okay, so it's fine to reveal whether you use them or not, and to see how much people have experience in using a spectrogram, and it looks like probably not too many of you do, so I will do just a little background on that. But before we do that, let's figure out this thing. Okay, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is an old saying, it's an adage. It's been attributed to many different people who are past editors, writers, advertisers, philosophers, different languages, have something like that in an adage of some sort. But I also want to add that it's really, especially if those words are oral and they are orally comprehensible, then they really make sense for us as teachers and learners of oral languages. Let's go and talk about what these terms mean, because they're often used when talking about accent and pronunciation in speech. So what does accentedness mean? It's how much one's speech differs phonologically from the standard or from the local variety. So that's based on a listener's judgment, and a listener may say, you have no accent, or you have an extremely strong accent, and it's difficult for me to calculate what it is that you're saying and then, put it all into my ears. And so actually, in fact, all of us have accents. But people generally use this word to mean an accent that's different from what I'm used to or what is standard. Now, when we talk about comprehensibility, we're talking about the listener's perception of how difficult it is to understand somebody's speech, their utterance. And again, a listener's judgment could be 1, oh, you're extremely easy to understand, and 9 would be extremely difficult to understand. Intelligibility is the extent to which a listener understands a speaker. So if the listener can transcribe the speaker's speech, you can look at a percentage of how much they get correct, and then that will be more or less the intelligibility aspect of it. Now, effective communication is intelligibility. So the intelligibility principle must be context sensitive. Thank you, John Levis, and many others. And we want to look at some features. So how about your experience? What are some factors that contribute to intelligibility in your students' speaking context? What are some factors? Okay, we've got things like vowels and suprasegmentals, word stress, intonation, places of articulation, fear. Okay, so another thing is whether people are from the same accent and they can understand each other. Okay. All right, great. These are some good ideas. Now, here are some factors contributing to intelligibility. These are not all the factors, but here are some of them. So the speaking rate, how quickly or slowly someone speaks. Have you noticed that sometimes somebody speaks too quickly for you to catch what they're saying? That sometimes happens, or they run all the words together. So that brings up the idea of pausing. Speaking, if you are looking at pausing, then we're looking at speaking phrase by phrase in thought groups. And sometimes people run all the words together. I've had students say that, well, if they say them all really quickly, then their whole speaking event will be over and they'll be done with it without actually thinking about their audience and how much the audience can capture in groups. So if you think about when somebody is talking to you, would you rather understand what their thought is, or you want to listen to every single phoneme that comes out of their mouth? No, probably you don't want to go in the weeds to that. So you want to be able to get the idea out. So thought groups are another important aspect. Content words are focus words such as main verbs and nouns, and they are generally emphasized in spoken language. Some are much more prominent than others in order to highlight contrast or new information. These are things that lots of times our speakers who are learning English don't capture and put into their outgoing oral speech so that listeners get the main idea. What's the prominent idea? Function words, on the other hand, are de-emphasized. They're reduced. And examples include prepositions, pronouns, articles, conjunctions, and helping verbs. Now, when you're doing writing, you often have to tell them to put those in because they may not be aware of how people are speaking and actually using those words. When we're teaching speaking, on the other hand, if students are used to writing, they see those words and may put too much emphasis on it instead of making them more de-emphasized. Okay, word stress. This is something that came up in our chat. Which syllable is stressed? The stressed syllable is longer, so in length, and it's higher in pitch, and it's louder, so the volume is greater. Sometimes our learners have problem with volume. They don't speak loud enough for us to hear them, so how can we understand what they're saying? Or they may taper off in the end so that at the end of their thought or the end of their sentence, they're not able to be heard clearly enough for their listeners. So these are some of the factors that influence intelligibility. Spectrograms can show those, but spectrograms cannot illustrate pitch, at least the ones that I'm going to show you today. So when we say, how do you spell easy? Some of you will recognize this is one of the examples that Judy Gilbert has often given. How do you spell easy? So that will not show up on this type of spectrogram that I'm going to tell you about. So I'm going to talk to you about Audacity. What is Audacity? Some of you know what Audacity is. Have you used Audacity? Okay, so Audacity is a free open source cross-platform software. It's for recording, it's for editing sounds, especially, well, for songs, for speech, anything, any kind of utterance. And what's really good about it is that you can use it on Windows, you can use it on a Mac, you can use it on other operating systems. You can use Audacity to, of course, record live audio. So you can record yourself, you can record your students. You can edit into any format like MP3, WAV, AIFF, and other sound files. You can cut and copy and splice and mix sounds together, which is an editor's job. You can add pauses, which is useful as a teacher to create learning materials where you would like your students to hear a model and then give them, say, 1.5 or 1.3 times as much to repeat in. So those are options for you, or to maybe make a dialogue in. You can also change the speed. You can also change the pitch of a recording. There are lots and lots and lots of things that you can do with Audacity, and it's very easy to use. So I'm going to show you this one, although I also use GarageBand because I'm a Mac user and we can use them on Mac, but I'm not going to show you that today. It's very, very similar in what we're going to talk about in terms of a spectrogram. So a spectrogram is a photograph. It's an image or a diagram of a spectrum. Well, what's a spectrum? It's the range of frequencies of sound waves. So it's a visual way of representing the signal strength, the loudness of a signal. And in our case, our signals that we want to talk about are utterances, are speech, whereas in some other field, some other scientific field, they may be listening to other sorts of things. In other words, simply, it's a visualization of the peaks and valleys of speech. So we can see the peaks and valleys and all the different kind of geographic features along that path. Now, some of you may be familiar with Judy Gilbert's pyramid, where we show the basis is a thought group, and going up we see the focus word, and then we see the stress syllable, and then we see the peak vowel. Audacity can help students communicate more effectively at each level of the prosody pyramid. And as we know in our group here, we have teachers of beginners and we have teachers of advanced students and anywhere in between. So this can be useful at any proficiency level. Audacity can help assess and prioritize the factors contributing to an individual's intelligibility. And I've put here 5 different areas like speaking rate, pausing, content versus function words, word stress, and volume. Now, obviously, a student doesn't have everything divided up in terms of how much each factor affects their intelligibility. But if it were all equal, there'd be a pie that looks like this, 20% each. But as I said, that is not exactly what's right. What you as an instructor can do is consider these aspects when you look at a spectrogram and help you decide or prioritize which aspect is more important to work with on a particular individual student. Because as you know, speakers of even the same language do not all have the same issues. Just like in writing, you need to work on them individually as much as possible so that they will grow by themselves. So what can we do? We can use Audacity for the auditory and visual features. Obviously, you can record the student speaking. So I've had students do, because it's pretty easy to learn, I've had students learn how to use the program themselves. Or if it's in class and you're face-to-face, then you can use the recorder yourself. Identify the student's pronunciation targets. That's what you do as a teacher. And of course, you can use it to model and practice intelligible speaking. Here are some sample pronunciation areas to address when you're thinking about a person's intelligibility. Some of our students may speak too fast, especially the ones who are, I guess you would consider them pretty fluent. They know a lot of words. They probably have a good idea, a handle over the syntax of English, and they think fast and they put all the words together, but sometimes they speak too fast for an audience to understand, especially if you're having them prepare for some sort of presentation, a lot of times they get nervous and they start speaking too fast. So a lot of these things may happen, in terms of how fast somebody speaks. Some of them don't pause enough. So if the student doesn't pause for thought groups, they know what they want to say, but the listener doesn't capture that whole thought or that content, that idea, then it just may get lost. So that's another area that you may wish to work with on students who have enough fluency to speak in longer sentences. Function words, as mentioned before, they do not understand that function words, even though on the paper they may be the same number of letters as a content word, they should actually be reduced, shorter, very soft compared to content words. They may have really good sentence structure and good vocabulary, but you don't know exactly what part of the sentence is important. So where is the focal stress, if there is any at all? So if I say he gave me the money, and he gave me the money, I don't have to return it. He gave me the money, not the honey. He gave me the money. You didn't give it to me. So those are examples of focal stress, unclear what part of the sentence is really the most important. Word stress, a very difficult thing for some people who don't either perceive all of the syllables in a multisyllabic word, or they pronounce them all the same, or they pronounce them with stress on the wrong syllable. So perhaps circumstance or circumference. Which one did you say? I couldn't really guess from the context. Illustrated or illustrated. Specific instead of specific. For some, the volume drops off toward the ends of sentences, or maybe the student speaks too quietly overall. So these are just some areas that you may wish to address with your learners. Now, prosody, the prosody is talking about all these suprasegmental aspects, the things that are not codified by letters A, B, C, D, and so forth, right? So phonemes are more likely to have some sound symbol correspondence, but the prosody, the intonation and the stress and the pausing, these are all kind of difficult to hear, and for learners maybe to hear and understand. So one solution that we can use is to use a spectrogram to help make prosodic features of oral language visible. So here's an example. Here's a comparison of a student and a model recording the same sentence. So here's one track that shows a student, and here's another track that shows the model. So in track 1 and track 2, what do you notice? So why don't you describe something that you can see that's different between the first track and the second track? Any differences? So what are those differences? What do you see? What do you notice? There's more variation in the second, okay? There are greater peaks in track 2. It's more dynamic, there's more emphasis, there's more pausing. It's all spread out in the student's speech. And in track 2, it's clumped up with longer pauses. Okay, so each one of these bigger blobs represents volume, or scientifically amplitude. It's ample in its volume. So the amplitude or the volume, the loudness, is evident by how big this mark is. And the smaller ones are less forceful, right? So the less forceful on those than on the big ones. And there is more space in between some of the phrases than there is in track 1. So track 1, it's, if you look at the, if we just call them blobs, then you can see that the kind of blob, 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 blob are about the same length, right? where you have blah, 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 blah. So there is a difference in the amplitude that is shown. There's a difference in the pausing that is shown. So it doesn't look as not monotonous. It's more, as someone said, dynamics shown by the peaks. Okay, so when we talk about word stress, we also know that every word has to have a vowel sound of some sort, and the peak vowel of a word, which may be a multisyllabic word, the peak vowel of the word is longer in duration. It takes longer to say it. So if I say longer and I say longer, you can hear the difference, right? So some people can hear that difference and understand it really well, while others don't. They don't really hear it, so seeing it is very helpful, all right? So the peak vowel is also something that can be louder, right? So louder, I'm speaking more loudly on the first syllable of this word. And it is also typically in English higher in pitch. So when I'm saying louder, I'm not saying louder. Do you hear the difference? The tone or pitch louder is not necessarily the common way, but louder, whereas high-low is typical. Now, in the kind of spectrogram that I'm showing you today, we're not looking at intonation. There are some much more complex, robust scientific programs that do that, but I wanted to show you something that's very easy and then deals with many of the issues that we make something visible that cannot be seen on paper. So I'm gonna let you see some, this time I'm gonna show you the sound, the spectrogram, as well as play the sound. How about that?
This exercise program. This exercise program. This exercise program.
This is exercise program. What I wanted you to see was the difference in the student and teacher models. So we see one of the things is that the student doesn't have the apostrophe S syllable, which is, so Liz's, and says only Liz. And then the other one is the part where in the word program, you see small, big, right? You see program, and that differs from program. So that's something that is visible, but the student may not be aware of in terms of hearing it. But seeing it is sort of giving them the extra boost as to the area of improvement needed. Let me see if I can get you another sound sample.
She starts doing her exercises.
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 She starts doing her exercises. So are you able to hear and perhaps notice in the spectrogram some differences? What do you see here? Right, so he uses the exercise, stress on the size instead of exercises. And I think, again, leaving off also starts with a final S. So final S's and Z and is, these three ES and S endings are important for this particular student, as well as the stress on the correct syllable. So you can see also there's a length here, a length difference between student and teacher views, right? All right, so now I'm going to share with you a different screen, and that's going to be the real screen for Audacity. So I'm going to show you now somebody who is a fluent speaker and the fluent speech in Audacity. I want you to look at things like word stress, focus words, speaking rate, pausing, fillers, volume drop-off, and then again we'll be looking at the student-teacher comparison. Okay, so let me bring up my Audacity. Okay, so I think this will focus your attention on the spectrograms. All right, this is Robin.
So it's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France. So it's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France.
Do you know where this speaker comes from? Can you tell? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Native language of the speaker?
Maybe French?
Very good. Okay, a French speaker. Okay, and does anybody know in terms of geography where he's talking about?
Luxembourg.
It's okay. Think of the country, the city.
So
Okay.
it's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France. So it's a small enclave.
Okay, so he's talking about a small enclave surrounded by, that's in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France. That happens to be Geneva. All right, so he's a student that I met long time ago.
So it's a small.
Long time ago, and he's come back to me at various stages in his career for private lessons. And so you can see he's pretty fluent, right? I mean, he's got enough vocabulary for it. But let me see what happens if I take out some of his fillers. Okay, so notice he has got, do you see this thing right here? So that's his, notice the French kind of, it's not right? It's not an it's but that's not really my main focus. I mean, I can talk to him. I will talk to him sometime about if he wants to make a filler, he should say instead of but not talking about that now, because let's just say we take that filler out and get him to his main idea. We can have him go to this.
It's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France.
Okay. Do any of you hear any word stress problems that you would want to work on? I'll play it again.
It's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France. It's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France.
The first word is that he says enclave with a long syllable on the second syllable. And in English, we stress that on the first syllable, either using the French enclave or the English enclave, both of which are acceptable pronunciations. So that's one of the things. So here's an example. It's a small enclave. It's a small enclave. It's a small enclave.
It's a small enclave.
So look at his. This is his long syllable, right? This is his short syllable. This is his long syllable.
Enclave, enclave.
And then, of course, he has a V at the end, which is a typical pronunciation in French, is to have a little schwa, enclave. And this is mine. Enclave, enclave. Actually, I cut off the V a little bit too quickly. Okay, so how does he? What's another word that he spoke with a different stress? Yes, somebody got that.
In Switzerland, but in Switzerland, but in Switzerland, but in Switzerland, but.
So what is this long one here?
Zealand.
So the longest syllable, you can see the differences in the syllables, right? You can see every time there's a burst, right? That's a syllable. So what happens is the longest one is here. The other ones are so short.
Switzerland.
And then he attaches the word but to it, that whole phrase, right?
In Switzerland, but.
So here's my version. In Switzerland. And I don't put the but on that one. I put the but on the next one. In Switzerland. All right, so what happens here? Let's listen to him here.
It's surrounded by France. It's surrounded by France. But it's surrounded by France. But it's surrounded by France.
Okay, so we have another. He has another filler right there. And if he spoke without a filler, well, I actually took out some of his fillers from before just to get closer to mine.
But surrounded by France.
So,
But surrounded by France.
so what's the difference that you see here? Obviously, you can see here's my sir, and here's my round, and here's my dud. So,
Surrounded by France. By France.
so this part here is a sibilant, and the main syllable is here. Fran, that's the big one.
Fran.
And then comes out here.
France.
Now look at the length of this, though. Look at how long mine is compared to his.
It's surrounded by France.
Because he gets around his surrounded by France is very, very, very small. So his whole thing sounds like this.
It's a small enclave in Switzerland, but it's surrounded by France.
It's a small enclave in Switzerland, but surrounded by France.
I have this gap here just because I was trying to match up with his speech. Okay, here's another one.
You have the incentive to make it correct. You have the incentive to make it correct. You have the incentive to make it correct.
Do you hear what he's saying? Okay, you can put a mark in that. You can mark in the chat what do you think he's saying, and if there's a word that needs attention. Okay, incentive.
You have the incentive to make it correct.
You have an incentive to make it correct.
So he's missing a function word. You have an and a haven't, so I put that one in.
You have an incentive to make it correct.
And notice like his voice drops off. Do you see where his voice drops off? And mine continues all the way to the end of the sentence.
For her.
Okay, let's try another one. Oh, here's an easy one.
Damn, I'm losing my vocabulary. Damn, I'm losing my vocabulary. Vocabulary.
Vocabulary.
Vocabulary.
So I can show him that his word of vocabulary is a little bit too big compared to everything else, whereas mine is vocabulary with the second syllable, and then making the sentence a little, making the whole utterance of that focus word a little bit longer. Here's another interesting one that I think it's here.
Here, there's much more collaboration and public speaking and interaction with upper management.
Did you understand that whole thing?
Here, there's much more
Collaboration.
And public speaking and
Interaction
with upper management.
I actually didn't. I didn't understand when he said upper management because he's dropping off at the end of his sentences and he put the word management. And I had to listen to that. I had to listen to his video recording several times before I got what he meant. Which is, I think what he's talking about is upper management. So that's why I made this one, a lot bigger. But he's like dropping off at the end of his sentences. Okay, I think this will give you, some example of how the spectrogram can give you some information about these suprasegmental aspects of the way somebody is speaking that are not necessarily visible to, somebody who's doing everything just sort of either by writing or by hearing. And I'm open to questions that you might have regarding using the spectrogram or any other questions. Go ahead.
So Sharon asked, what is the student's objective in getting further tutoring? Is he having listener comprehension issues?
Oh, okay. So the student needs to become a lot more intelligible. All right. He is in a very high-powered position and moved to the headquarters in Geneva of a multinational corporation, I guess. And so he needs to do more speaking than he used to. He used to be in the same industry, but he did a lot of stuff on his own and not as much collaboration as apparently there are now. And he's also not in an American environment in California anymore. Now he's with people from a very diverse, from a lot of different countries. Geneva is very international, so there are a lot of Americans there, but then there are a lot of French people there and the Swedish people from, every country. So his intelligibility has got to reach people of different listening backgrounds. And he knows that he has pretty much regressed in his ability to make himself understood. So his point is to try to become more intelligible. And I said, okay, what we're going to work on, a lot of it is going to be on your word stress. We're going to work on your phrasing. We have to work on what is the primary word that you want to say in a sentence, so that people really focus on that. That's your focus word. Later on, I will help him with more speech-fronted, report-fronted kind of speaking. But let's work on just the sort of overall intelligibility first, and then on public speaking prowess later. So it's not listening comprehension. He does not have problems listening and comprehending to what people say. He does not have that. But this is listening discrimination, and a lot of people have this issue. Native speakers as well. Native speakers, foreign language speakers, listening discrimination is a very key skill. And so that's one of the things I want him to focus on as well. And I know because he's scientific that showing him these kinds of visuals attached to his auditory and showing him the comparisons between my model and his, using his words, using his phrasing, using his speech, can bring home the problem areas that I want him to work on.
Thank you, Marsha. And we have one more question. I missed it if you answered that before, but how did you get the transcription on top of the spectrogram?
Oh, okay. So I wrote it. I entered it. I just typed it in there. So there's a lot of things. Okay, there's a lot of things about Audacity that I don't have time to teach you today. I do have a tutorial on it if you go to my pronunciation doctor, and you'll find that. I will send you the file, and then you can also get the resources to my Marsha Prof Dev blogspot.com. That's an occasional blog. I'm not very good at doing things very regularly there, but I do have one on how to use Audacity, just the basics. Audacity has lots of tutorials, and that's where I kind of drive into there to find out how do you do this sort of stuff. But this is one of the things where you can double click on it and you can change it. It says here, for example, rename your clip. So then I renamed it, and I typed everything in. So that means that I did a bunch of transcription based on his video with me, and then I entered certain parts of it there. Okay, any other questions?
I don't see other questions in the chat, but if you have any questions, please raise your hand and just feel free to speak up.
Okay, Lisa mentioned this thing right here. Lisa, you mentioned that your student seems to run a lot of content words together, like upper management, instead of spending more time on those words. So this is what I want to help him with, because he does squish these things together, because in his mind, lots of times when, I guess, as a speaker thinks that this is a word that they use often, or a term that they use often, they just squish it all together because they figure, well, everybody probably knows this word. But when I heard that clump, I had to tease it out before I could figure out it's really upper management. Yeah, so I will work with him on those sorts of things, on focus words and how to lengthen them and then put the stress in the correct locations. Thank you. Yeah, right. And also, this is just Audacity. Obviously, there are a lot of other programs out there that can show different things about speech. And so this is not the one and only, but this is one that is easily accessible to all Windows and Mac users. And because one of the things I wanted students to do, and I did this when, at Mission College with students who are all different levels of technology, I was able to teach them some basic things about using Audacity, whereas if I would not try to teach anybody like my students at Mission College how to do Prot, that would be, too complex. So I wanted something simple enough to use, and so that's why I presented this to you. And as I said, GarageBand on the Mac is great as well and can show these spectrograms. Thank you so much for being a great participating audience. If you have further questions, you can reach me at pronunciationdoctor@gmail.com, and later I'll send out the slides.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much, Marsha. That was super interesting, and I'm definitely going to start using that in my own lessons too.
Thank you, Marsha.
Thank you, everybody.